tonight, would better training prevent cases of excessive use of force? 3 News investigator Rachel Polanski is digging into that for us.
In this widely circulated video, George Floyd, who was black, can be seen on the ground, his hands cuffed behind his back, while a white officer presses him to the pavement.
I think even a 7-year-old would understand that restricting someone's airway can more than likely cause serious bodily harm or death.
That's Detective Sergeant Edwin Pantoa, a 27-year veteran of law enforcement, condemning how officers handled this arrest.
With that particular situation or that type of technique, there is really no need whatsoever for you to be on that person's neck.
And there have been lives lost here in Cleveland.
What do we want? Justice!
Tamir Rice.
I'm with my mother every day.
Tanisha Anderson. Those 137 shots. To many, these deaths symbolize racism and indifference.
There's a race problem in America today. The people that are suffering in this contest between the power of the police and the power of the citizens are the black folks.
And experts say much of what is happening is the result of inadequate police training.
If you want to operate well, you have good policies, you have good procedures, you have good training, and you enforce your policies.
To become a barber in Ohio, you must complete 1,800 hours of training. To become a police officer in Ohio, you must complete 600 hours of training. The disparity strikes some as ineffective.
We have a heightened level of scrutiny from the community. We have a heightened level of scrutiny from the government.
In recent years, police have been under intense scrutiny, especially in their use of force and restraints.
That there's all sorts of methods that can be used to avoid the types of situations, not the one that we just saw, because again, I don't think you need training for that one, but for the most part, that can avoid so many of these situations that we're facing.
And beyond training, departments must foster a culture to ensure that these policies are followed.
It's all about the enforcement. If there's no penalty for breaching the rule, then the rule doesn't matter, and it never did.
In May of 2020, a video surfaced on the internet that shocked and horrified many Americans, leaving them questioning the authority and the competency of the United States Police. This video was of a police officer kneeling on an African-American man's neck while he cried, "I can't breathe." This man was George Floyd, and after almost 8 minutes, he was killed due to asphyxiation. Names like George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, Tamir Rice, and Casey Goodson are not just names, but victims of police violence and brutality. Although police brutalization is most prevalent among communities of color, it is also a national issue, regardless of race. Tony Timpa, a white male who also suffered from a mental illness and was suffering from a mental health episode at the time, was restrained by police who threw him on the ground, put their knee in his neck, and shoved his face into the dirt. As Tony lost consciousness from lack of oxygen, the officers made jokes and laughed at him. Eventually, Tony was killed due to lack of oxygen. The mourning families of these victims and other indignant Americans are advocating for police reform. Good afternoon, my name is Katie Wells, and tonight I will be talking about why the expansion and extension of police training is necessary and how it could prevent police brutalization and negative police-public interaction. I'd like to thank my panelist, Melissa Schaldenbrand of the Leon County Sheriff's Office, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, but she was a great help. Law enforcement's mistreatment of those, like Tony, who are suffering from a mental health episode could be a result of insufficient training in areas of human psychology and human relations. Around 9 p.m., Houston police received a call that a man was running in and out of highway traffic. This man was Nicholas Chavez, a 27-year-old father of 3 who also suffered from a mental illness. In the police report, it read that Tony appeared to be holding a metal object, one they believed he would use to potentially harm himself or others. And fearing for their own safety, the officers began to fire upon Nicholas. After the first shot hit him, he kneeled on the ground in surrender. The officers then proceeded to fire yet another 24 shots, all hitting Nicholas and eventually killing him. In an interview, his father states, "He was on his knees. He was already wounded. He wasn't a threat to anybody at that point. It was an execution." According to the Prison Policy Initiative, those with multiple arrests are up to 3 times more likely to be suffering from a mental illness. An article from the Washington Post reveals that 25% of victims of police shootings were suffering from a mental illness or experiencing a mental health episode at the time. Furthermore, the Bureau of Justice Statistics shows that only 13% of mentally disabled inmates were jailed for a violent crime, meaning the other 87% of mentally disabled inmates were jailed for a non-violent crime. The majority of offenses committed by those suffering from a mental illness are non-violent. So why are they being met with violent means? Nicholas, Tony, and so many others encountered officers who were unequipped with the skills or knowledge on how to help someone who is experiencing a mental health episode. The majority of negative or violent police-public interaction is a direct result of insufficient training. Another result of insufficient training lies in the mistreatment of minorities by police. This is evident in the crime of racial profiling. Bryan Stevenson, a well-known criminal defense attorney and victim of racial profiling, describes his experience in the book, Policing the Black Man. Bryan Stevenson was sitting in his parked car listening to music when police suddenly appeared. When he got out of the car to see what the problem was, the officers immediately drew their weapons, threatening to, and I quote, blow his head off. He then was forced onto the back of the police car while they performed an illegal search of his vehicle. After no criminal evidence was found, he was finally released. But unfortunately, the experience of Bryan Stevenson is not an isolated one. A study conducted by the University of Michigan Law reveals that African American drivers in Maryland and Delaware were stopped up to 3 times more than their white counterparts. The same study also showed that despite being 7% less likely to be found with drugs, African American drivers were searched up to 10% more. Data from the Citizens of Police Project shows that almost 75% of white male officers in a 2016 study were accused of using excessive force on African American males. These disparities are caused by a man-made system lacking the skills to fulfill its to protect and serve. We're expanding and extending police training to include sociological and psychological training. Crimes such as racial profiling can be reduced, and positive police-public interaction can become a more consistent occurrence. Which brings me to my third argument, expanding and extending police training. Currently, there's no national standard, but depending on the state, it's usually 14 to 20 weeks of training required before a police officer is able to enter the field and carry a gun. Within these 14 to 20 weeks, the trainees are required to go through defense tactics, firearm training, drugs of abuse, physical fitness, and much more. However, most, if not all, of these subjects focus solely on enforcement competency and combative tactics rather than other recreational subjects such as human psychology and human relations. In fact, the only training offered in these subjects is voluntary and excluded from the basic training program. According to the National Criminal Justice Reference Service, Swedish police trainees are required to go through 3 years of basic training and train in over 300 hours in subjects such as human psychology and human relations. Furthermore, statistics revealed that over 65% of Swedish citizens trust their police, and that only 48% of Americans trust their law enforcement. American trust in police is at an all-time low. So what steps can we take to restore it? Sharif Khan writes an article in the Daily Wire that offers suggestions like taking a more holistic approach to training officers and shifting away from a combative mindset to de-escalation. Taking a more holistic approach to training officers could include the prioritization of psychological and sociological training. Shifting away from a combative mindset to de-escalation could refer to the difference between combating a crime and preventing a crime, or the importance of a proactive mindset versus a reactive mindset. As a result, police will be better equipped to perform their function to protect and serve if we prioritize these subjects, and positive police-public interaction will become a more consistent occurrence. In the midst of chaos and civil unrest, it could be difficult to find God and where he may stand on these matters. But as he has shown time and time again in story after story in the Bible, he has always proven himself to be on the side of those who are poor, oppressed, and less fortunate. Proverbs 22:22-23 reiterates this truth, saying, "Do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause and rob of life those who robbed them." In the same way, those who are being treated unjustly by those in authority is not ethical, nor is it biblical. And although the ability to abuse power lies in the hands of each individual officer, more training will better equip officers with the skills and knowledge to restore American trust in police and potentially prevent police brutalization. Thank you.